Hi, my name is Olivia Atherton, and I'm a postdoc at Northwestern University. Thanks so much for tuning into this talk on deconstructing problematic peer reviews in personality psychology and some calls to action. So today I'm going to start off by giving you a brief background of where my experiences with problematic peer reviews are coming from. Then we will commence the shit reviewers say portion of the talk, where I'll do some deconstructing of problematic peer reviews in personality psychology. Then I'll summarize some of the costs and propose some actionable solutions. So how and why do I have so many problematic peer reviews to share? In graduate school, I spent 6 years working on the California Families Project, which is a longitudinal study of 674 Mexican origin youth and their parents from the Northern California region. This study is ongoing and currently spans 13 years, where families are assessed annually. About 85% of the parents are first-generation immigrants to the United States, and the median parent education level is about 9th grade. So this is a very unique segment of the American population who are not only underrepresented in our research studies, but they're also underrepresented in the ranks of personality psychology in the US, from graduate school to full professors. And this is despite the fact that Latinx individuals comprise about 18% of the US population, are projected to be close to 30% of the population by 2050, and Mexican individuals are the largest demographic subgroup of the Latinx population. So most of the problematic peer reviews I'm going to show you today are a result of my experiences publishing personality research with data from this project. However, it's important to note that my experience is a very privileged one. My identity as a white woman influences the ways in which I receive and grapple with these offensive peer reviews. So I do not hold the identities of scholars who are directly harmed by these peer reviewers' problematic comments. And I am by no means the first person to speak about these issues. The comments I'm going to show you today are not isolated incidences, but rather are indicative of widespread issues in the field at large. But before we get into the shit that reviewers say, let's first talk about some of the shit that editors say. So research studies with predominantly ethnic minority samples or samples from marginalized communities more broadly are often desk rejected at prominent journals in the field. And the reason that is often cited by the editors when this happens is that they say this research is better suited for a specialty journal. So they'll say things like, this study examines personality stability in a large sample of Mexican Americans, a group that has not been studied in this regard. I'm certainly sympathetic to increasing the diversity of populations represented in basic work in personality psychology and other domains of psychology too, but I don't see any particular reason to expect personality stability patterns to look a lot different in the specific population. While the current work broadens the pertinent empirical database, I don't see that it adds something distinct conceptually. The piece should be very publishable, but my own sense is that it better belongs in a more specialized journal. So the problem with this is that members of the field view journals as either mainstream or specialty journals, where psychological research with white and European samples are seen as mainstream and solid contributors to theory, and psychological research with ethnic minority samples, for example, are just another study to add to the empirical database, doesn't add anything distinct conceptually, and are better suited for a specialty journal. So this is very eloquently presented in this paper where Cortina and colleagues show that between 92% and 100% of articles in JPSP, JRP, and the Journal of Personality exclude consideration of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and social class. Whereas personality research that considers these social structural factors can be found in the Journal of Black Psychology, the Hispanic Journal of Behavioral Sciences, the Asian Journal of Social Psychology, the Psychology of Women Quarterly, and so on. So this asymmetrical pattern simply brings one question to the forefront of my mind, and that is, where is the Journal of White Psychology? All right, so if personality research with a sample of historically marginalized individuals gets past the editor, what kinds of comments do reviewers make? Here, I'm just going to highlight several patterns that I've seen the most in my experience working with data from the California Families Project. So first, reviewers commonly ask for some justification to study ethnic minority populations. They'll say things like, is there a particular reason to examine the present research questions in a sample of Mexican origin youth? The argument for focusing on Mexican Americans needs more thought and support. I think it's fine to focus on Mexican Americans, but the authors should build a stronger argument for this demographic subgroup. Or a compelling argument is made that a basic test of the links between X and Y is needed, then a homogeneous sample of Mexican origin youth is used to test the model. So what's the problem with this? Consider the following. How often have you seen comments like these in the peer review process? Is there a particular reason to examine the present research questions in a sample of white American youth? The argument for focusing on white Americans needs more thought and support. I think it's fine to focus on this group, but you should build a stronger argument for this group. So one issue is that authors are never asked to justify the study of white populations or told to build stronger arguments for studying these populations. Authors who place a focus on historically marginalized communities are always asked to do this, even though they should not have to justify the study of these populations. If anything, authors who use data on white or Western European samples should be asked to justify, as these data are convenient to collect and are overrepresented in personality research. In other words, we already know a lot about white personality psychology. All right, another common and persistent request from reviewers is to note the lack of generalizability of the sample or the need to compare to other groups. So for example, reviewers have said, why is it important to focus on a minority population for this matter? Why would results for minorities differ from majorities? How do Mexican origins differ from a national American sample? Or the use of a Mexican origin sample is a strength of this study, but might it also potentially limit its generalizability? Or is the Mexican American group that participated in this study different from other Mexican Americans and from other immigrant groups and from other national minorities? What makes them so special? I think the authors should mention the focus on a sample of Mexican origin youth in California, living in California, as a factor that could limit the external validity of the study and the discussion of the limitations. So again, the problem here is not the request to think about external validity or generalizability. Those are great requests. The problem here is the asymmetry. So researchers who work with ethnic minority samples are asked to talk about generalizability, to describe how the results will differ from all other possible socio-demographic subgroups, or even explicitly ask for a white control group. The implication being that research with this ethnic minority population is less generalizable than research with white or European populations. Whereas researchers who work with white and Western European samples can often get away with the one sentence perfunctory statement in the limitations section that states, this research might not generalize to non-weird populations. Okay, another theme of comments I've received a lot. What about cultural factors? Reviewers will say things like, neither the introduction nor the discussion considers how or why Mexican origin youth may manifest X or Y. There is a rich literature on generational status, cultural factors specific to this population that is informative to the ideology of X and Y and should be referenced here. The entirely Mexican origin sample analyzed by the authors is unique and able to provide very interesting contributions to the study of X. However, the authors did not address how cultural concepts and ideas might influence an individual's behavior. So to be clear, I'm not saying that we should exclude a discussion of cultural factors from this research. I think it is imperative to discuss the social, structural, and sociocultural contexts that impact personality and development in historically marginalized communities. But the problem is that personality research with white samples are never asked to talk about white culture and are never criticized for not addressing cultural concepts specific to white populations. In other words, peer reviewers are biased in thinking that culture is relevant to ethnic minority samples, but it's not relevant to white people. And this is a huge problem. Okay, let me pause here. Are you still with me? There's a couple more comments I'd like to highlight before I summarize the costs and provide some solutions. So the next couple of peer comments were not given in response to my work with the California Families Project data, but rather were reviews of a recent opinion piece that includes a discussion of diversity and generalizability in personality psychology. So in this opinion piece, myself and 24 other co-authors suggest that diversity and inclusion are necessary for personality psychology to become a credible and valid science. And in response, a reviewer says, regarding the push for greater inclusivity, I would certainly agree that this is highly desirable, but also highlight the fact that there may be some tension between these goals and the goal of improving methodological rigor even further. All right, so I disagree. We actually make the exact opposite point in the paper. And this reviewer goes on to say, good personality research is likely to become pretty darn difficult in the future in terms of the educational prerequisites and resources it will require. No question, these things are grossly unfairly distributed in society, which is in large part due to stereotyping, wealth and income inequality, and so on. All right, I agree. Yes, there are structural inequalities in education and other resources. But then the reviewer goes on to say, but the inconvenient truth is that for this reason, the most rigorous research is most likely to be carried out by white people who were born and raised in wealthy neighborhoods, at least for the foreseeable future. I'm aware of how non-PC it is to even say that, and I am all in favor of fighting these inequalities, but so statements like these are extremely harmful and are indicative of this person's feelings about the superiority of white research, which I imagine is just the tip of the iceberg. Moreover, this reviewer was willing to put such a statement in a peer review to a group of 25 co-authors who are diverse in terms of nationality, gender, identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and so on. So this is not okay, and this is currently happening in the field. So here's another. The reviewer says, in discussing the need for more culture diverse samples, the fact that some cultures are more collectivist and simply care less about individual differences may be mentioned as a potential problem. Why and how shall we study personality in a culture whose members think very little of or about individual differences? Some cultures don't care about individual differences? What? This comment is not only completely baseless and again evident of the reviewer's deeply rooted views about the homogeneity of individuals from other cultures, but it's also incredibly problematic and harmful to underrepresented minority scholars in our field who have to read comments like these. Our colleagues should not be subject to this or have to respond to comments like these in the peer review process. Okay, how about this one? So the reviewer quotes an excerpt from our paper where we state the definition of URM, or underrepresented minority, where we define it as groups whose percentages in our personality undergraduate programs, graduate programs, faculty positions, and professional societies are lower than their percentages in the general population. The reviewer goes on to say, with respect to undergraduate and graduate students, this is surprising to me because in my country, the percentage of people who identify as LGBT have on average a higher education level than the average population. And as many women as men receive higher education. The authors are correct that measuring these percentages at the level of departments and scientific organizations is difficult, these percentages are again higher than those in the population. And then the reviewer goes on to say, cite this Wikipedia article of LGBT demographics in the United States. So our point still stands. The reviewer here seems to be deflecting and cherry picking a couple of stats about one sociodemographic subgroup to challenge the notion that we should increase diversity in the field. These types of comments are not okay. And here's the last one I'll show for today. So the reviewer quotes an excerpt from our paper where we say the most overt examples of hostility towards women and underrepresented minorities stem from norms of professional behavior that are common to psychology more broadly, which tolerate harassment and discriminatory behavior in many professional contexts. The reviewer goes on to say, I am very surprised to read this. Where is discriminatory behavior tolerated? Am I misunderstanding this statement? Do the authors mean that even though most institutions have rules against this, it still occurs? Yes, Yes, that is exactly what we are saying. These comments are simply a fraction of what occurs in the field. And as a reminder, peer reviews are conducted by our peers. This is currently happening in the field, and I think it needs to change. Okay, let me turn to summarizing some of the broader costs of these problematic reviews. Please note that this list is by no means exhaustive. So these comments are problematic and harmful. They create an academic environment that involves double standards, asymmetry, hostility, denial, and gaslighting. These comments are representative of the level of gatekeeping that exists in the field, what research is published, where it is published, and how papers are written. And then this gatekeeping then cascades to affect early career researcher retention, hiring practices, tenure and promotion, and so on. And all of the above directly and specifically harm underrepresented minority scholars in the field. So what can we do starting today to make change in this area? First, as peer reviewers, we can reflect on our roles as reviewers. How do your identities and biases affect the way that you write peer reviews? How can you write reviews to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion and eliminate harm to underrepresented minority scholars in the field? So I'm currently putting together a working group to develop a paper on such a topic, peer review guidelines to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in personality psychology. If you are interested in joining this effort and coming up with these guidelines, I am seeking co-authors. So just email me for more information. My email will be on the last slide. As editors, if you recommend a paper, go to a specialty journal, think about why you are making that recommendation and correct your behavior accordingly. What is so specialized about the paper? And as editors, if peer reviewers provide harmful comments, step in and call out those problematic comments in your decision letters. And then last, as a collective, we can reduce the asymmetry that's happening in the field by including measures of white identity and white culture in our research studies to investigate how white culture influences personality processes. And we can also work to change journal policies regarding standards for peer reviews, reporting of sample demographics, and inclusion of paragraphs, not sentences, paragraphs about the generalizability of white personality research. So let's get to work.